Good evening, everybody. I will call this meeting to order. This is the Planning and Development Committee meeting of Monday, June 26th. I am the chair, Jonathan Nusma, council member of the 4th Ward. I will ask Director Flax to call the roll.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Councilmember Harkaris.
Here.
Councilmember Ravel.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Wynn. Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our next item, which is approval of the minutes from our meeting of June 12th. If somebody would like to make that motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed and seconded by, I believe that was Councilmember Ravel. It was Councilmember Kelly, seconded by Councilmember Kelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. That moves us to public comment. We are going to proceed with public comment from people in person, and then we'll do online public comment. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people signed up for public comment, and the limit is 2 minutes per person. So we will start with Haley Guyon, Jack Weiss, and David Galloway.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for your time. So this relates to agenda item P1 for your consideration this evening, resolution 22R23. Our concerns, I'm speaking on behalf of Crosby Theodore LLC. We have raised concerns with the City Council, Land Use Commission, and the Planning and Development Committee about the development next door. And in our view, the resolution appears to be submitted in a way that it is inadequate under Illinois law. Illinois requires inclusion for there to be submitted simultaneously with a subdivision plat, inclusion of any study or studies which shall show typographically the elevation of land prior to the commencement, and how the studies should demonstrate that changes to elevation would impact the flow of water. The adjoining property owner and legal stakeholder next door, 1817 Church Street, has previously raised with the P&D committee concerns of water drainage issues, and the fact that this resolution does not include any such studies showing the topography and how the flow of water and surface area will be changed raises substantial concerns. We are a historic landmark next door, and we continue to struggle with flooding issues on multiple occasions, and we have failed to see plans shared about this development, and of course, the study herein is required under state law, and so we're again faced with a resolution without the necessary elements, and we feel we need more information before this can proceed. So we would really respectfully request the committee to at least hold this item in committee until the study is produced. Thank you.
Jack Weiss, David Galloway, and then Tom Hoffmeyer.
Good evening, Speaker. My name is Jack Weiss. I'm speaking on D1. I'm a 56-year resident of Evanston, former chair of the Sign Review and Appeals Board, former vice chair of the Preservation Commission, founding member of Design Evanston, and past president of Design Evanston. The purpose of Design Evanston is to instruct the public on subjects of design that are beneficial to the community, and two, to provide services that result in the lessening of the burdens of government. I invite you to look at our website, designevanston.org, to see how we address those issues. You may remember SPARC, Site Plan and Appearance Review Committee, and more recently DAPR, Design and Project Review Committee, city committees designed to address design and development issues in Evanston. Design Evanston's perception is that there has never been a professional designer on either committee on a regular basis, and that design seemed to be an afterthought. The Community Design Commission you see proposed tonight puts design in the hands of professionals, architects, designers, and others who understand the important role design plays in nearly every aspect of the daily life of our community. We urge you to review the proposal carefully, discuss its importance, and move ultimately to create an ordinance that will establish Evanston's first Community Design Commission. You will be joining others, Chicago, Madison, and Ann Arbor, to name a few, who recognize the value of good design in the urban setting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is David Galloway, followed by Tom Hoffmeyer, and then Grace Matthew.
Good evening, council members. My name is David Galloway. I've been a resident of Evanston since 1983. I am a registered architect. I've served on the Plan Commission and the Preservation Commission, and I'm currently Vice President of Design Evanston, the non-for-profit design advocacy organization that Jack Weiss just acquainted you with, which seeks to provide design advice and encourage quality design in the city of Evanston, and has done so for over 40 years. Design Evanston has supported the adoption of the CDC and provided advice and feedback during its development. We think that staff has done an exceptional job in compiling and analyzing other cities' design commissions and has created a proposal that is appropriate and pertinent for our needs and will ultimately be of great benefit to the city and its residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Hoffmeyer, Grace Matthew is declining to speak, so then we'll go with Josh Wolf and Bruce Enenbach.
Good evening, I'm Tom Hoffmeyer. I've been an Evanston citizen since 1996. I am also an architect and a member of Design Evanston. I have just a very brief remark. I support the development of the Community Design Commission, not as a way of arbitrarily restricting design to a style or a way of thought, but to provide a more thoughtful approach to considering design that enhances our community, to give some professional thoughtfulness to the whole process of designing in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Josh Wolf, Bruce Enenbach, and Paul Breslin.
Good evening. I'm speaking on item P3. I live in the condominium 1634 Hinman that wraps at the Hinman and Church. This is about, I believe, the fourth go at this this planned development for a mixed-use building. I just want to again emphasize that it's, out of the code. It's asking for a special consideration. The Land Use Commission recommends denial again. It just feels like we're going around and around, and how many times do we have to go through this before enough is enough, respectfully? And then also just the consideration that the zoning is for a fixed story level, and it continues to not meet that, and that exists for a reason. So I believe that more than anything is a reason to consider, again, denial. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bruce Enenbach, Paul Breslin, and then Gene Breslin.
Good evening. Bruce Enenbach, 45 years, Jesus, resident of Evanston. Talk about P3, which is commonly known as the legacy. I'm not sure why this developer is once more before us. I do not understand why this development continues to pursue such an irresponsible and non-compliant project. This developer has experience. Surely this developer conducted his own due diligence, and surely this developer thoroughly acquainted itself with our zoning, law, ordinances, and codes. And based on that due diligence and development experience and knowledge, they purchased the property. So this developer entered into this with their eyes wide open, and they are putting forth a wildly non-compliant and non-responsive proposal. There is nothing in this latest iteration that should move any council member to approve this project. It's the developer's responsibility to put forward a project that will satisfy their profit expectations that fits within the environment of our laws, ordinance, and codes. The developer cannot expect the city or the citizens of Evanston to ignore our laws, ordinances, and codes to help make their project more profitable. This developer has come before us more than 3 times now. This developer has been rejected by the Land Use Committee. It's called developer risk. And developers, they take it on This developer took it on, eyes wide open. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Clearly, they should lose here, and it's all they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Breslin, Jean Breslin, and Barbara Revsine.
Hello, I'm Paul Breslin. I live at 1635 Hinman, just on the other side of the street of the First United Methodist Church. I have lived in Evanston since 1976. And if I sound like a broken record, it's because HRG sounds like a broken record. This building, once again, is unrelated to basic zoning. Now, I understand that the city's planning department decided to give them 100 units instead of 54, and then add 40 units because of their 10 units of affordable housing for 140. That is not giving them a break. That is essentially performing legerdemain, or alchemy, as I called it in my last remarks. It has nothing to do with the zoning. That is clearly not the intent of the zoning. Now, I have been reading about how other small cities have been dealing with housing shortage and affordable housing shortage. And there is some consensus that it requires greater height and density. But that does not have to be done in every part of the city. And the place I live is, there's this D4 zone. It's supposed to be 8 or at most 10 stories, 54 units. This isn't anywhere near that. And I bought my condo with the understanding that that was the zoning that I was living in. The zoning is, in a way, a promise to the residents that the city places some constraints on what it is willing to do to generate revenue. And what I sense here is the end justifies the means argument, and those arguments never end well. So I urge you, once again, to reject this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Jean Breslin, Barbara Revsine, and then an online comment from Bill Schneider.
Hi, I'm Jean Breslin. I have lived with my husband here in Evanston since 1976. I was also a practicing architect for a number of years. I'm testifying about the alley because we just saw on the city site a little notice from HRG that said, well, they would be very helpful in managing the alley and the alley traffic, and that they would bring the community into this. Well, I did not sign up to be a 24-hour-a-day crossing guard or traffic policeman on an alley which is, in fact, mostly, if at all, 15 feet, not 20. My husband and I were there several times last week remeasuring. And in order to get it to 20, you would have to shear off all the utility entrances and exits from all the buildings that have them, including the First United Methodist Church, which has been in its current position since 1911. So they would have no electrical conduit, no water exit, and no gas exit or entrance. And that goes for the building on the corner, on the Davis Street corner as well, the southeast corner of the alley. As we measured it, the alley is 14 feet 8 inches, the paved alley. This is the Church Davis Street alley that runs behind the Chicago Avenue buildings and also behind the buildings on Hinman. Thank you.
Thank you for
14
your comment.
feet, 8 inches, not 20 feet. Tremendous amounts of traffic.
Barbara Revsine.
I'm Barbara Revson. Widening the alley is an impossibility, especially at the south end.
If I can ask you to
where
use
you'd
the
have to
microphone.
tear down. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Widening the alley is an impossibility, especially at the south end, where you'd have to tear down the buildings on either side of the alley to do it. Think of them as the Pillars of Hercules or the Straits of Gibraltar. They're there. You cannot widen the alley. The zoning plan, I wish to remind you, is a promise to area residents. It was created to guarantee the geography of the immediate neighborhood. People living in residences that back up to the alley could rest assured that they wouldn't have a chaotic and potentially dangerous traffic situation in their backyards. It's an alley. It's not State and Madison.
Thank you. We will now go to online comment from Bill Schneider, if Mr. Schneider is available.
Good evening. My name is Bill Schneider. I am an Evanston resident living in the Second Ward, and I too am in opposition to the proposed development at 1621 to 1631 Chicago Avenue. On June 22nd, I electronically submitted a 2-page document with detailed reasons for my opposition. I will briefly highlight my comments with the following 5 points. I strongly encourage each of you to review the public record of Horizon Realty Group's continued tax abatement, which may well establish the course of conduct to follow. Simply put by another Evanston resident, this proposed development is nothing more than a money grab by Horizon. Horizon Realty Group is not a developer that Evanston should trust, as evidenced by their long history that suggests approval of this application will not end well. Next, we do not need additional retail space. What we need is more affordable housing. Finally, Horizon's proposed development will add to the current traffic congestion along Chicago Avenue and the streets around the proposed development, thus creating safety hazards that may very well result in injury or death, which will financially impact the city of Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our list of people that have signed up for public comment. Is there anybody that we have missed, either in person or online? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Going, gone. Okay. We are going to hear some more written public comment from Director Flax when we get to that item on the agenda. So we'll reserve that for right now and move on with items for consideration, the first one of which is item P1. If somebody would like to make a motion on P1.
I will move item P1, Resolution 22R23, approving a plat subdivision for 1801 through 1815 Church Street and 1708 through 1710 Darrow Avenue for the Mount Pisgah subdivision.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Burns. Before we begin the discussion, let me just clarify that what we are voting on here is a resolution that subdivides the property. Last time this committee met, we approved for introduction an ordinance that would approve the swap of the property, the sale of the property. Before we can do that, we need to subdivide the property. So we're not talking about selling the property with this item, just the act of subdividing it. So with that clarification, I'll open it up to questions and comments, starting with Councilmember Ravel.
Excuse me. I was just wondering if staff had an answer to the comment made during public comment about the lack of a study that state law requires.
Thank you, Chair Newsma, Councilmember Ravel, members of P&D. Alexandra Ruggie, Deputy City Attorney. This Law Department did have an opportunity to review the State of Illinois Plat Act, and based on the exception provided for the sale or exchange of parcels of land between owners of adjoining and contiguous land, we don't need those studies, so it's not required at this time.
Anybody else? All right, seeing no further discussion, I will call a roll call vote.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Harakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
No.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye. So-
5 to 1.
That passes 6-1. Moving on. I'm sorry, with my microphone on. Item P1 passes on a vote of 6-1, moving us on to item P2, if somebody would like to make that motion.
Move item P2, ordinance 55023, granting a special use permit for a convenience store at 831 Foster Street in the B1 Business District.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Burns. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Burns.
This business has not requested a liquor license, correct? If you wouldn't mind, and if Chair, if you, and he'll be brief, but I received emails today that were confusing, and the applicant will talk about this briefly, please. But it was very clear from the beginning that they had no interest in pursuing a liquor license. They met with community members during the 5th Ward meeting. So if you could just put that to bed briefly, and then we'll move on.
The chair will recognize the applicant if you could just state your name.
Yes, Mohammed Abdul Majid.
Thank you. So your question, Councilmember Reed. Burns'
Councilman
question.
yeah, that's it. If you could just put that to bed,
Sure.
say what you told us during the meeting, and then that'll be it. I'll have something recorded that I can forward
Okay.
on to the residents.
Yep. So yeah, there's not going to be any liquor sales or lottery sales or anything of that sort. The convenience store will only have grocery store items, deli sandwiches, as well as tobacco. But other than that, no liquor.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Quick question.
We got Councilmember Kelly and then Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. Thank you. This is distinct from the other convenience store that's located pretty close across the street over on Maple. Could you talk about how this is? I think this is different than your. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So our main focus is going to be on our deli sandwiches. We currently have a location on Sheridan and Hollywood, which is called Hollywood Deli. So we just want to replicate our previous store, and our main focus is going to be selling, convenience store items as well as deli.
Great. Thank you. And is there any why wouldn't one apply to be a deli as opposed to what's the? It's just a matter of understanding with zoning. I mean, it's.
Sure. So that's something that we want to specialize in, and something that I feel like we'll exceed. So that's our main focus.
I mean, as opposed. So I mean, why?
You saying why apply as a convenience store instead of as a deli? You're saying?
Yeah.
I think that's a somewhat of a business question, business license type question. I don't know.
A zoning question.
Zoning
really.
question.
I'll recognize Attorney Ruggie.
Thank you, Chair Nusma. I believe it's the zoning district. It's just what it's called in the zoning special use application, convenience store, and then the store versus the deli. The deli is included as the part of the convenience store, so it's still the primary source of income for the business is the convenience store.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So it's mostly a convenience store?
Yeah, mostly convenience
mostly
store,
convenience
and then
store.
and then the end of the store will be mostly like the deli counter.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reed.
Yeah. So you plan on selling tobacco?
Yep.
Are you selling flavored tobacco in your business?
It's mostly going to be like maybe cigarettes and vapes. Flavored tobacco, possibly not. That's not something on our agenda.
And are you selling flavored e-cigarettes as well?
Yes.
We'll maybe have a separate conversation after this about making
Sure.
sure you're aware of regulations that we're considering now that could impact
Sure.
your sales.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, Director Flax, could you call the roll?
Of course. Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
6-0.
All right, that brings us to item P3, which is of some interest for the folks assembled tonight. And Councilmember Reed, are you?
Yes, I will move ordinance, item P3, ordinance 60-023, granting a special use permit for planned development with site development allowances at 1621 through 1631 Chicago Avenue in the D4 Downtown Transition District.
All right, so before we get into the discussion
Second.
here, it's been properly moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Burns. Before we get into the discussion, just want to lay out the ground rules. We're going to begin this with Director Flax reading a brief summary of written comment that we have received. And then, in accordance with City Council Rule 6.4, the applicant will deliver a presentation no longer than 10 minutes. Followed by a presentation from objectors who have availed themselves of their right and informed staff of their intention to do so. At that point, this will then be turned over to the committee for discussion. This is, per City Council rules, not to be considered a hearing, and it's not an opportunity for cross-examination of witnesses. The questions will come from committee members, and the answers will come from folks that the chair recognizes. So, having said that, let's hear a brief summary of written comment that we have received.
Thank you, Chair Nusma. Paul and Jean Breslin did send in their comments in addition, and you all have that in your packets that's out on your, in front of your seats. In addition, Candace Heafy wrote in opposition with largely focused on the scale of the development being out of scale to the neighborhood. Also, Adina Kleiman wrote in opposition, again, scale of the development and additional traffic. Holly Wathan, representing the North Church Condominium Association, wrote primarily about the alley management plan being insufficient. Kira Kelly wrote in opposition to the scale of the development and to the size of developments in the downtown overall. And last, Robert Hecking wrote in opposition based on wind turbulence and traffic issues primarily. All of those are in the packets out by your places.
All right, thank you. So now we will recognize Jeff Michael for a 10-minute presentation. Jeff is the applicant for this project. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to the P&D committee. As Jonathan said, I'm Jeff Michael. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Realty Group, the applicant and developer of the proposed Legacy project. In the interest of time, the rest of my team, they'll introduce themselves if and when they're called upon to speak. We thank you for your time this evening and the opportunity to present our project, which we believe will have a pivotal and very positive impact on the city of Evanston, sending it into a trajectory relating to business, economic, and population growth that Evanston sorely could use. Given the tight time constraints, we'll get straight to the point. I'm going to forego any detailed walkthrough of the project design at this time. In a moment, I'm going to cede the floor over to Jonathan Amarillo. Jonathan is an attorney with the Taft Law Firm. John handles cases before the United States Supreme Court, the Illinois Supreme Court, the United States Court of Appeals, the Illinois Appellate Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, among others. He is currently president of the Appellate Lawyers Association and has served on the boards of the Chicago Bar Association, the Chicago Bar Foundation, the Illinois Bar Foundation, and a number of charitable organizations. He is also currently chairing the search committee tasked with finding the next Cook County Inspector General. John has been tasked with addressing the seminal issue at hand that has to do with the objection to height relating to this project. He authored a letter dated May 25th, which is part of your packet, outlining our legal and policy position with respect to the matter, and he's here tonight to further expound on that matter. Jonathan?
Thank you, committee members, for allowing me to speak with you for a few minutes tonight. I'm going to get right to the point. We heard from several members of the opposition tonight that 105 feet is a hard limit under the Evanston zoning code. I'm here to tell you that is wrong as a matter of law. I interpret statutes for a living. I know what I'm talking about on this point. Let's look at those statutes. The first one, obviously, is 61158 regarding building height. And that says that the base zoning height limit for the D4 district is 105 feet. But it also says, and this is the part that the opposition ignores, the same ordinance also says that that limit doesn't count parking levels for which you can add another 40 feet. So that brings the base limit up to 145 feet. Then we look at 611.110, specifically subsection C1D. And that says that the city may grant allowances for this D4 district up to another 40 feet. And it then repeats the language regarding parking levels and how those don't count. So it's emphasizing there, I think, that these provisions are meant to be read in a complementary, not a contradictory way. What does that mean? It means that the limit for the D4 district is 185 feet. Now, the Legacy project is 165 feet, 20 feet below that limit that the ordinances clearly lay out. And it's not just me saying this. The City Council said this when it approved the Albion project, which is actually taller just down the street and in the same district. If we look at the benefits that the Legacy project will bring, zoom out from 165 feet and look at the broader landscape here for a minute. It is no secret that cities around the country are hurting right now. They need investment. The Legacy project proposes to bring a $60 million investment to this city. Its benefits are legion. Significant tax revenues for the city, measured in the millions and tens of millions of dollars over time, much of which will go to our public schools. 213 new residents to the downtown, excuse me, in a market that is 97% occupied. There is an extreme housing shortage in Evanston. It will create ground floor retail to revitalize a flagging block. It will create 35 new jobs to run the building with local residents given preference for those jobs. It will create hundreds of new construction jobs. It will create apprenticeship programs, a buildings trade employment program for local residents. It will create a scholarship program for local residents. It will ease congestion on Chicago Avenue, despite what you heard from some members of the public here tonight. And it will pay for repairs to the surrounding public ways. Perhaps most importantly, in a lot of regards, it will bring affordable housing to a ward that has 0 affordable housing units in market rate buildings. None. Now, when we address the opposition, we have to weigh all those benefits against what they're saying. We know for a fact, as a matter of law, that their interpretation of the ordinance is wrong. But their primary concern is height. They argue that the Legacy doesn't provide a quote-unquote suitable transition between adjoining districts. That term is used in Ordinance 611.51. It's not expressly defined there. Now, the opponents say that this means that the definition for suitable transition is entirely discretionary, entirely subjective, but we know that that can't be right. Even discretion as a matter of law needs to be cabined within some standards. Where do we find those standards here? We find them in the ordinances, which I just reviewed, which allow a building of this height very clearly. That's the only way you can look at these ordinances and have them make any sense and not be contradictory. That brings me to my last point, the inclusionary housing ordinance, affordable housing. Evanston has a well-won reputation for now being a welcoming, inclusive, and diverse community. The city passed the IHO, I think, to show that it's willing to put action behind those words. The ordinance said it is this community's public policy to promote demographic diversity, to grow a local workforce, to give people of low and moderate income means and chance of being members of this community, something that with housing prices rocketing everywhere across the country, including in Evanston, it's really hard to find these days. The Legacy project will bring affordable housing to this ward for the first time. That, again, does not have a single unit, not a single unit of affordable housing in a market rate building. That is an incredible fact. The Legacy will change that as per this city's stated policy. Now, considering all that, A denial here would create real problems for the city regarding the proper reading and application of the IHO. Section 611.111A of the IHO says that developers are entitled, that's the city's word, not my word, entitled to bonus market rate housing units for every affordable unit at a ratio of 4:1. The Legacy will have 10 affordable units, as I said before. That means that the Legacy is entitled to 40 additional bonus market rate units. Where is it going to put those units that it is entitled to as a matter of law, if not going up? If an allowance isn't given, the Legacy will be denied those 40 units that it is entitled to as a matter of law. Now let's say, for the sake of argument, that the project gets voted down here today. I ask you this: what does that say to other developers about the city's commitment to things like inclusionary housing? What does that say to people of low and moderate means who want to be a part of this community? What does that say to current residents who want to keep out newcomers? What does that say to current residents who want to welcome newcomers? What does that say to people who think diversity and inclusion, that's all great, just not in my backyard? We ask you to approve this project, or at the very least, give it a neutral vote so that the whole city council can vote on it, because this project will affect the entire community. Thank you, and welcome any questions.
Thank you. Let's hear the opposing presentation first, and then we will hold off on questions for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will recognize Bill Frocher and, Bob Frocher and Bill Brown as representatives of those in opposition to this project.
Thanks, Chair Newsma. We have hard copies if the P&D committee members would like them, but I'll leave it up to you.
Do we?
Yeah, allows you to write notes on them. Go ahead, Bill.
There we go.
Thanks for the opportunity to share our concerns. I'm Bob Frocher, an Evanston resident. My colleague Bill Brown is chairman of the board of the First United Church of Evanston. Our document is lengthy, but I will focus on only 3 pages, pages 3, 4, and 5. I will speak to the points that were just raised. Let me be clear. We are not saying don't build any building there. That's not what we're saying. This is not an all or nothing sort of deal. And the lawyer who just spoke argues he's more informed than our Land Use Commission. I would argue to the contrary, given that they've been doing this for a long time. He only cited a single point which he found fault with, which was related to height. There's many standards of approval which he did not speak to. We will speak to those. Please note the page numbers are in gray on the bottom right of each page. Please move to page 3. Why are we here? I've heard some confusion about this. Just want to make clear. The city council's authority is clear, as shown in the 3rd bullet here. Per 6316 of the city code, the city council approves or disapproves any application for height beyond 50 feet, special use, including a planned development. The proposed Legacy is both a planned development and a special use. So the developer has the right to apply to you for approval on a planned development and a special use. Only you have the right to approve. That approval is contingent upon finding that the Legacy meets the standards with an S of approval for both planned developments and special use. HRG's attorney spoke nothing about the standards. Those are documented in the city code, including in the D4 transition district, which is a special district. The LUC, including Luke Chairman Rogers, found that the Legacy proposal failed to meet 4 critical standards of approval at its March 28th meeting and voted to deny approval and recommends denial of approval to the City Council. Additional Evanston City staff determined the Legacy is non-compliant, and 4 site development allowances are required. Please move to page 4. These next 2 pages just summarize the facts and the reasons for denial. It's much more than just height. First, the economic benefits cited are significantly overstated. The Legacy economic benefit analysis included 4 major flaws that we found, including ignoring the loss of the $110,000 in annual taxes currently generated by the existing land and buildings, and assuming 100% building occupancy when calculating tax receipts. We likely missed other errors they made. The flaws we found reduced total cumulative net revenue through 2035 by 30%. The resulting reduction on the project's net present value is also large, a 36% reduction in net present value. The first appendix provides complete detail on our comments regarding the overly optimistic economic benefit analysis. Second, as mentioned, the LUC, including Chair Rogers, denied approval of this development on March 8th and recommends denial of approval to the City Council. The LUC concluded, based on written findings of fact, that the development does not meet 4 major critical standards of approval: 2 standards for special uses, 2 standards for planned developments. Also, the building does not comply with the City Council approved plan for downtown Evanston. 611 of the City Code documents the requirement for adherence to the policies, principles, and standards contained in the plan for downtown Evanston as a requirement for approval of planned developments. On that point, quoting directly from the LUC's findings from the minutes of their March 8th meeting, direct quote, "The proposed scale of the project does not meet the transition intent of the D4 district, and so the standard is not met." You're likely aware this building is in the D4 transition district. A number of people have already mentioned it. It's specifically designed to be a step down to the residential area on Hinman directly behind it. In addition to all this, the proposed building's neighbors oppose it. You have heard from some of them. There are many others, First United Methodist Church, and other residents in neighboring condos, homes, and apartments. They know this area better than any of us. They believe the building's too tall, but more than that, too dense, will create congestion and dangerous conditions both on Chicago Avenue and in the alley behind. The LUC received detailed written comments opposed to the building from 50 Evanston residents for the March 8th meeting. There were only 2 written comments in support. Please move to page 5. Continuing our reasons for denial, we've already discussed the building's failure to meet plans, guidelines, and standards of approval. There really are significant congestion and safety issues created here. Chicago Ave and Church Street is among the most congested intersections in the city. The traffic study on the building by KLOA has no analysis on the impact of rideshare, food delivery, package delivery services on traffic and their crazy driving patterns as they drive around looking for parking, which is often found illegally, to allow drop-offs and pickups. The alley in back is already very dangerous and overwhelmed and serves many neighbors. You'll hear from one in a moment. The existing congestion and danger will be greatly exacerbated by the addition of 140 units and 215-plus residents. HRG's newly proposed communications plan with other alley users was crafted without any input from other alley users and was not reviewed with other alley users. Not a great start to a communication and coordination plan. Even if we were able to do coordination, it doesn't change the fact that the existing alley is overwhelmed and dangerous, and adding 215 residents to retail establishments will make that much, much worse. Remember, there is also a total child daycare facility back there which relies on that alley for emergency access to the playground. Finally, approval of this building would set a terrible and dangerous precedent for this special D4 transition district. It would gut the standards of approval. It would ignore the LUC's written findings of fact in opposition, and it would ignore the LUC's recommendation to deny approval to the City Council. Every developer going forward would point to this building as precedent for another building that is taller and denser just by a few stories. I'd like to just conclude with, if they want to change the zoning, change the zoning. I'd like to have Bill make a few comments as well.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, council members. My name is Bill Brown. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees at First United Methodist Church, and I'm joined here this evening with our senior pastor, Reverend Grace Matthew. You've just heard in some detail the significant non-compliance to zoning regulations contained in HRG's plan development proposal. On that basis, a no vote is the responsible action. This plan disregards the concerns of project site neighbors for whom you have just heard. It clearly ignores city regulations for allowable buildings on this site, and in addition, allows for an outsized return on investment for Horizon. Therefore, I urge you not to let a modest incremental financial benefit for the city outweigh the importance of the integrity of this historic neighborhood adjacent to this project site, including the venerable First United Methodist Church, one of the founders of the city. Please vote no, as did the LUC in their meeting on March 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, and thank you to all four presenters for bringing your presentations in well under the 10-minute maximum. So I will now go to the committee members for discussion. If anybody would like to be recognized, we'll go with Councilmember Kelly, followed by Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for the presentations. So I just want to talk a little bit about the importance of a transitional or a transition district or zone in itself. This is in a D4 district, what we call a transition zone or district, which is established in order to provide a suitable transition from downtown districts and those districts adjacent to the downtown. And this particular transition district is just 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. So I imagine from here on into the future, this is going to remain a transition zone. It's hard to imagine expanding any closer. It's 3 blocks from the lake, directly behind Evanston's iconic and historic First United Methodist Church, a local landmark designed by Talmadge, with over 700 members. So huge, community right next to it. In the transitional areas, the size and the height of the buildings, get smaller as you move outside of downtown into neighborhood residential areas. A transition zone is so important to bring a sense of organization and planning to a city. It isn't random. You don't, it's about showing that we don't have a haphazard plan. That thought and care has been taken. A lot of thought and care was taken in planning the city. And it also helps to manage traffic, having a transition district like this. And this is a really congested corner already. And again, as already pointed out, it's not about this development or no development. 8 to 10 story development is allowed here, but it's about roughly half of what's being proposed. And that's just really over the top and really going to, I think, undermine the integrity, the congestion, the transitional zone of this district. Again, it's already very congested here. There's a narrow alley that abuts the church. And so, and I also want to just emphasize again what's been emphasized, that the standards, according to the Land Use Commission and Chair Rogers, 4 standards aren't met. They're significant standards. And we are supposed to approve this only if the standards are met. But multiple aren't. Again, not just 1 or 2, but 4 significant standards. I won't go through those. So again, I want to emphasize it's not about this development or no development, but it's about a development that's within reason, within the zone, within our zoning code, respecting this transitional district. And again, I also agree that if we did allow such huge variances here to their zoning, we are going to set that dangerous precedent whereby this transitional eastern zone along Chautauqua Avenue will be permanently undermined, likely provoking future proposals for similar high rises. Again, just sort of shattering that transitional zone. And I know Councilmember Nguyen is also deeply concerned about this and also not supportive, not here, but also very concerned about the ramifications further down along Chicago Avenue. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Reed is next.
Yes, thank you. I first want to start with, while in Evanston we do not engage in the Chicago-style aldermanic prerogative, I certainly give deference to my colleague whose ward this is in, and certainly want to be careful about hearing and addressing those concerns of you and your residents. I am generally supportive of this project, but I want to be clear on a few items. So I'll start with, because Councilmember Kelly, you mentioned the transition zone, and that was mentioned by the applicant as well as the objectors. I'm going to ask this question to a few people, but first I'll start with the council member. What is a suitable transition?
So it's already been designated, the height there. We have, a height of 105 is what's designated, dwelling units of 54 versus the 140.
And I'm sorry,
Right now, I think that it has been planned as a transition zone to gradually go down to, to residential zoning. So I'm standing by our zoning.
So you're saying our zoning code is what defines what a suitable transition is, and you're saying...
I'm referring to the 105 feet and to the 54 units.
And that is, what
I'm
section
not,
of the code?
and again, all the variances or allowances, we may grant those. I'm not arguing that, but I'm arguing the height is the height. An affordable unit or a parking unit does not reduce the height. It still is getting higher. And where it's zoned right now, that would stand far and above all other buildings along Chicago Avenue, again, obliterating that transitional zone.
Thank you. And to the objectors, does your opinion differ with Councilmember Kelly, or do you? If you can just indicate a
If
yes.
you could approach the,
Sure.
the podium if you're going to answer more than yes or no.
My personal view does not differ materially. If you look at the standards, don't get wrapped up in hand-waving and the numbers of stuff that was jammed in on a one-off basis. If you look at the standards of approval, it needs to comply with the 2009 downtown plan, and we have a table in here that describes what those ranges are for both base and even with all the bonuses. And with all the bonuses, it says 110 feet. So I don't differ materially, personally, with what Councilmember Kelly said.
Do you know what section of the code that is? And I know you're not a lawyer, and I'm not, but if you happen to know.
I didn't say it was part of the code. I said it was part of the 2009 downtown plan, which is part of the standards of approval. That specific standard of approval must be met. That's part of the code. The code says the standards of approval must be met. The 2009 downtown plan is one of the standards of approval, and it says 110 feet with all the bonuses.
In a transition zone.
In the D4 transition district. Yep. And there's a table for the back.
Appreciate that. And then to the applicant, to their highly credentialed attorney. Did the downtown master plan weigh into your analysis of the legality here?
I'll defer to my colleague, Graham Grady. Thank you, Chairman and members. My name is Graham Grady. I'm also an attorney at the Taft Law Firm, and have been a part of the presentations to the Land Use Commission and other bodies. First of all, with all due respect, the 2009 plan was never adopted by the City Council. The 2009 plan was never adopted by the City Council. Therefore, you cannot rely on it for guidance. It's an interesting set of information, but it was not adopted.
So the information we have,
addition-
excuse me, says it was. This is important. I don't want him to go on and then I miss this. So I just think we need some clarification on that. This is a point of information, correct?
Yeah, Chair, or Councilmember Reed has the floor here. I think this is a point of information for somebody from staff who might be able to weigh in.
And I was probably going to go there and ask the question that
It's
you...
a point of information.
Good evening, committee members. Megan Jones, Neighborhood and Land Use Planner and Interim Planning Manager. The downtown plan was adopted in 2009. As a part of that plan, there was proposed zoning to essentially help enforce that plan, but that zoning that was suggested was not adopted. So the plan was adopted. The suggested zoning was not. So we're dealing with the zoning code as we have it now.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
So
And
the
Councilmember,
adoption of the-
excuse me,
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Burns, I believe that answers your question.
It is not, but I'll wait.
Okay.
I think it does, but it may not, but I'll wait my
All
turn.
right, so Councilmember Reeds has the floor, and
Just briefly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The adoption of the plan without the coordinated zoning being adopted really renders the plan ineffectual. How can you adopt the plan and then not adopt the zoning that's recommended by that plan? So I appreciate what Ms. Jones is, Megan is saying, but you have to look at it in context. The other point I wanted to make, and then I know the floor is yours, not ours. The recommendation of the Land Use Commission is exactly that. It is a recommendation. The opponents would make it appear that you have no choice but to do what the Land Use Commission recommends. If that were the case, we wouldn't even be here, because the vote at the Land Use Commission was 4 votes in favor and 5 votes against. So by virtue of the fact that it's here, even though it lost by 1 vote, suggests that it's advisory to you only. It is advisory to you. 85% of the standards were satisfied. 85% of the standards were satisfied. 7 out of 9 special use standards were satisfied. 3 out of 5 of the special use and the plan development standards were satisfied. 5 of 5 plan development in the D4 district standards were satisfied, and 7 of 7 site control standards were satisfied. Again, the action of the Land Use Commission is a recommendation only. You are not bound by it, because if you were bound by it, we wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to present.
Yeah,
because
if I
the
can
vote was-
thank you.
interject
Thank you. I'd
there.
like to,
Yeah.
I'd like to have comments limited to response.
Yeah, if I can
limited
interject
to
there. 'cause
answering council members'
This
questions.
body is fully aware of our power and what we have the right to do and not to do, so I appreciate that. But I am curious as to one, I didn't get seem to get a difference of opinion, but is it correct that what the gentleman said, that the, can you, Ms. Jones, yes. So is it correct that, so it's clear that the 2009 plan was adopted, but is it correct that the adjoining regulations as far as zoning were not adopted?
That's correct.
That is correct. And what impact do you believe that that has on the, validity or efficacy of the plan?
I think in some cases it can make, I don't want to say enforcement, implementing the plan more difficult to do. We also can have instances where the plan may not completely match with what our existing zoning is, since the zoning does not really enforce or support what the plan says. So we do have times where you're looking at documents that don't quite jive, essentially.
Thank you. And so with that, where does our definition of suitable transition come from? Is a definition of what suitable transition is for these transition zones defined within the plan separate from the zoning code amendments?
To my knowledge, I don't believe there is a set definition for suitable transition that's within the plan.
I see Mr. Sterling maybe has. I'm sorry, Chair, if I can ask for.
Yeah, we're going to limit this conversation to questions asked by members of this committee, and answers will come from folks that the chair recognizes, and the chair recognizes Mr. Sterling.
Thank you very much. Kate Sterling, City Planner. The downtown plan specifies a transition, in this case, for what it calls the eastern edge zone on the eastern edge of Chicago Avenue, the suitable transition being between 66 and 110 feet.
So within the plan, it does specify that there's 110 feet?
Correct. Yeah.
If I may ask the other folks responding, that's pretty clear that our downtown plan does specify a 110-foot transition standard.
Point of information.
Point of information, Councilmember Burns.
The chair recognizes.
I mean, I guess the more direct question is this table that we have, was this part of the plan passed through in 2009? Was this codified? And this is what it says. East Edge. It says 66 base with bonuses 110. Again, a few moments ago, it was said that part of this plan, which I'm unclear which part was adopted and which wasn't. But is this the part that was or wasn't adopted?
Councilmember
And
Burns,
it's
could you
basically what
refer-
Mr. Sterling said.
Could you
It's-
refer to a page number on this?
This is
from
page
the
number
objector's
66
presentation?
in the opposition or objector's presentation. What is that number down there? Yeah, it's not 66. I'm sorry. I'm just looking at any number I see. I don't know if this has a number.
If I may answer, I can answer all
Oh, 10. I'm sorry. My thumb was.
I'm sorry. Let's.
It's number 10, I think. Is that the number?
Let's have
there? No.
Councilmember Burns' question answered, and Mr. Michaels, if we come.
Asked on a direct question, I have a direct answer for you. Where the term suitable transition is used, it's used once in your zoning code. I have it right here. There is no definition, but it says suitable transition. That's the only time it's used in your zoning code.
So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
My question
Councilmember
is-
Burns
yeah.
we're looking for an answer for his question.
So the chart that you are referencing is within the plan. So again, the plan was adopted.
Okay.
And those are recommended heights to provide for suitable transition or suitable heights within the various sub-areas of the downtown. There was no adoption of the recommended zoning that came along with that plan. So it's just the plan itself that provides recommendations for how future development should occur.
And if I go ahead.
Yeah, that's. I'll begin to wrap up here.
Councilmember Reed, if you could.
Yeah. Yes.
Begin to wrap up. We have other business to cover this evening.
Okay. With that, if you so it is clear that our downtown plan, which in our code is one of the factors that has to be considered. Is that correct?
Throughout the standards, we do reference meeting the intent of our plan. So comprehensive plan, downtown plan, other plans that might be developed for other sub-areas within the city. So, and that is actually listed in here. So 611-110, thank you specifically, list that.
Okay, thank you. I rest questions for now.
Councilmember Burns is requesting.
Yeah, I just still want to understand the distinction between I guess what were some of the zoning changes that could have been adopted that came out of or were recommended by the Downs and Evanston plan, especially any that apply to what we're discussing today. That's the piece I'm still not understanding.
Well, I don't recall the specifics of the recommendations of the zoning ordinance changes, but I do recall that the suggested changes were more form-based and would help to get to those recommended heights that were put within the plan.
Okay.
And Councilmember Burns, if I may, Alex Ruggie, Deputy City Attorney, I believe the purpose behind this is if the downtown plan that was adopted by City Council, if the plan then was reflected in the zoning code, your height in this transition zone would have a specific number in the zoning code. As it stands, those recommendations were not implemented into the zoning code. So the zoning code does allow for a certain height, and then the parking garages don't count towards that height, and then with the inclusionary housing, that provides for additional. So there's nothing in the code that prevents that. It's site allowances that can be asked for and granted by the council. But if the council back in 2009 had adopted zoning changes that mirrored the exact downtown plan, it would have limited it similarly. So I think that's why we're in the conundrum that we are tonight. So it's still up to the council to determine how they interpret the legislation, how they interpret the zoning code as it stands.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still have the. So, but all we have now is a land use commission that has been told that as part of the standard, they're supposed to interpret what they believe is the intent of the Downtown Evanston plan. Is that correct?
Correct.
which one could interpret to mean the 6 to 7 stories or whatever it says.
Correct.
But that could differ between each commissioner. Each commissioner could have a different interpretation of what that mean of how to interpret the Downtown Evanston plan, especially as it relates to the 6 to 10 and all that, or?
I would agree with that, and also
Okay.
you've got other standards that speak to meeting the zoning code. So then there are some other.
There's some things
points
that are
of conflict
conflicting,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of the 185, that whole breakdown, I think Attorney Ruggie, you mentioned it before, but can you just explain again how you get from the 100 and whatever it is to 185?
Can I ask the applicant's attorney to explain it, because I think he knows the exact numbers a little bit better than I do.
Sure.
Councilmember Burns, I'm happy to answer that question. I agree with the city attorney's interpretation. I think it's important to realize here how legislation works. You have the zoning code that was codified. You have the city plan. The relevant provisions of the zoning code were not codified. That is not part of the relevant law. Then you have the affordable housing ordinance that was codified, and it contradicts the part of the plan that was not codified. All of the law here is on our side. And that law that you just asked about is this. 61158 building height gives you a 105 foot limit in this district. The second part of that provision says that you can get another 40 feet for parking levels. So that brings you up to 145 feet, essentially. And then 611.110 C1D, that's a lot, I know.
That first part, is that something that this body would have to approve that, or is that something that
No.
they just
as of right.
They get it as of right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The part the discretionary part is the next 40 feet, and that's in 611.110 C1D, and that says that the city council can grant another 40 feet on top. That brings you from 145 to 185 or 165.
Okay, and staff agrees in terms of zoning, not understanding what the intent of the Evanston plan was that wasn't completely adopted, but the existing zoning allows by right 140 feet at this location.
145.
145, sorry. It's for staff, please, yeah. Just the zoning, law, legal, I think these are all zoning and legal questions.
Specifically, it can be
Up to.
145.
But by right, not anything we need to approve, but at their request, they are granted the additional 45 feet.
Correct. If
Okay.
they have a building that is 105 feet and they have 40 feet additional, that is primarily for parking, then you get to that 145 feet, and that would be allowed by right per our zoning code.
Okay.
Up to that amount.
Okay.
If they only have 20 feet of parking, then they get that 125 feet.
Okay. Last question is just an issue about the alley, widening the alley. Somebody broke out, I think, some measuring tape and determined that it was 15 feet, not 20. Just trying to understand the relevance of that, if at all relevant.
Thank you again, Graham Grady, Councilmember Burns. There was never a plan to widen the alley. The applicant's proposal is to pay for the resurfacing of the alley, the entire block from Church to Davis, to pay for the resurfacing portion of the alley. There was never a plan to widen the alley.
Okay. And actually, this is the last question. It's just quickly, if we can go over what those land use standards are. I think they've been mentioned several times tonight. I think the community that's listening in deserves an opportunity to understand that. So whoever is.
Give me a second. I have to pull those up.
action from the land use. So is it these right here? All right. We will stand at ease for a few minutes while we come up with the exact answer to this question.
Okay, so
All
we
right,
have,
ready to go?
yes, we have several sections that speak to the standards that have to be met in order to approve a development. And those sections are standards for special uses, so section 63510, standards for planned developments.
And I'm sorry, excuse me, because I don't want you to, I should be more specific with my question. The ones that were, that they
Not
feel
compliant.
were not met.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry about that.
no problem. Give me a second as I.
I have them here if you.
Oh, okay.
Councilmember Kelly, you have the information?
Yeah, I believe it's special use. The first one, that it undermines the transition intent of a D4 district. Special use, so it has to adhere to special use standards and also plan development standards. The other special use standards, that it causes a negative cumulative effect on the neighborhood, including the height, the congestion, parking, traffic. And then the plan development standards, that the scale of the proposed project is not compatible with the overall character of existing developments in the immediate vicinity. And I believe the second plan development standard about the adverse impact on the use and enjoyment of surrounding properties, as well as the adjoining property values.
And can you, I'm sorry,
yeah.
can you clarify where you are getting this information?
Sure, this is from the, one moment, and I'll pull out for you, this is from the standards for special use for planned development and standards for planning development from the Muni Code. I'll pull that up for you, just give me one
And
moment.
if staff
also
could just verify.
These specifics for the discussion that occurred for each of those standards is
Yeah.
actually within the minutes of the Land Use Commission, and those were actually linked within your meeting package.
Yeah,
So staff, you're verified that what Councilmember Kelly said is correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
and
So that answers Councilmember
Well,
Burns'
this was
question.
that was really for the public to hear. Now, what I want to know from staff too is, do you think those standards are left open to a lot of interpretation? Whereas there was one, if you're using the downtown Evanston plan, you have some guidance there, right? The 6 to 10 stories or whatever it is, that helps to guide how I'm supposed to understand what I'm being asked to weigh. Those other three, unless I'm missing something, sounds like this body and the Land Use Commission or the individuals on those bodies could interpret that differently. They don't sound like hard and fast. Is it 6 to 10 stories or not? Am I understanding that correctly, or am I missing something?
That appears to be what the discussion was. In some of these points, there was some disagreement.
Right.
So it would.
And I see why, right?
Right. So there wasn't necessarily a full-on unanimous agreement that something did not meet the standard.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, as I think Councilman Reed said earlier, we understand that that body is an advisory body. This body makes the final decision, and so I think that's important to note. It's one thing, and I think some of the information we got is like, oh, they didn't meet the standards, but you got to look a little deeper than that. And you could still agree that they didn't meet the standard, but those standards are left open to a lot of interpretation. There's only one of them that, again, if you're using the Evanston, downtown plan to guide you, allows you to actually say, you know what, yep, 6 to 10 stories, how tall is the building, it's over that amount, because this is how I'm interpreting the intent of the Evanston downtown plan, I rule that this doesn't meet the standard. Everything else is kind of up in the air, and I regardless of how you feel about this this particular issue, I wanted to make sure that was known, and hopefully we can clean some of this up during our comp plan and make it a little bit easier to not only for us but our Land Use Commission and our staff to guide people through this process. But it's not a good one right now, and I think that's probably the biggest failure just on this institution as a whole. But we're working on it. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Burns. Nobody is seeking to be recognized who hasn't already spoken. I have reserved my personal comments until the end. Councilmember Reed, Councilmember Kelly are both seeking recognition. If I could ask you to be very succinct and mindful of the time, that we do have another discussion on our agenda for this committee before we get to council, so I hope we can wrap this discussion up fairly quickly. So Councilmember Reed.
I think Councilmember Revelle just.
She did just flip her light on, so we'll go to Councilmember Revelle.
So we've had a lot of discussion about height, and that is a big concern. Is it too tall for a transition district? And I agree with my colleague, Councilmember Kelly, that it is too tall, but I guess I'd like to focus on the density, the number of units, and then particularly what that implies then for the congestion around the building. I appreciate that this iteration of the proposal no longer has access to the building across the bike lane and across the sidewalk, and instead it comes in from the alley, but that has its own problems because it is a very narrow alley. It's a heavily used alley. The Horizon Alley Management Plan says the alley is a highly trafficked corridor. So I spent quite a bit of time walking around the alley one day, and the whole time I was there, it was entirely blocked by a big moving van. So there's the congestion in the alley, which I'm concerned about, and then it's really congested on Chicago Avenue in front of the building, and we'd be adding a lot of the delivery trucks, the Ubers, all that new kind of traffic that we don't really haven't traditionally accounted for, and I think we need to ask the firms that do the traffic analysis for any of our applicants really need to start taking that into account as well. So I am concerned about what it would do in terms of the congestion on Chicago Avenue and the difficulty that would be caused in the alley for the other users of the alley, which who are plenty. So that's really my main concerns.
Thank you, Councilmember Revelle. Councilmember Reed for
Yes.
just a minute or two.
Yes. So I'm going to vote yes for this project. I think, as was made clear, there are a number of places where our code conflicts. There is a downtown plan that was made in 2009 that sets a certain transition height. There's our inclusionary housing ordinance that gives the applicant certain rights. There is an allowance for parking that gives the applicant certain rights. And while I value the downtown plan and I value a public process such as the downtown plan, I think it's important, one, for us to maybe look back at the context of when that plan was created and who traditionally is able to participate in plans like that, and think about the time. I don't know if the plan at the time was really equity focused, if there was a sense of a focus on equity at that time. It wasn't quite there wasn't quite the focus on equity that we have now. And I wonder, what should we be prioritizing? Should we prioritize, one of the things I heard was a concern about traffic, and I heard that from the residents in the alley, regarding the alley. Well, yes, our downtown is more congested than certain parts of the city, but it's also the most transit-oriented part of our city. And if we aren't going to allow density in our downtown because it could cause congestion, well, then where are we going to allow density in our city? Because I can't think of too many areas in our city that are as connected to public transportation as this area, as our downtown. It seems as though our inclusionary housing ordinance would allow the occupants to have 40 additional units by right. And staff, I don't think there's a disagreement with that point. And so, again, I thought it was really compelling what message are we sending to our residents who are struggling to afford housing in Evanston, to gain housing in Evanston, when we aren't living up to an ordinance that was adopted, not a plan in 2009, but an ordinance that was adopted by this council that gave an incentive to build affordable units. If we're not honoring that, we are sending the wrong message. So, there are folks who said that staff, that we have a staff full of alchemists who were in the lab and creating standards that don't exist. And to me, it seems that those standards do exist. There is some conflict, but these standards do exist. We know that our downtown is struggling. I think our downtown and our city is in a really good place, but there are some challenges, and we know that folks are not going to, it seems as though folks are not going to be returning to our downtown. Office workers aren't going to be returning at the rates that they were pre-pandemic. So we need more folks living downtown to make sure that our downtown continues to be vibrant and strong. And then it was mentioned, many of us have heard this statistic many times, that we know that our city, that the North Shore is 97% occupied. If we, by creating housing units, we necessarily ease the burden on other units and potentially allow affordable units elsewhere in the city to be freed up by this, and as well as creating new affordable units in an area that has not had affordable units for some time. And then
Councilmember Reed, if you
I will
could
close
wrap up.
here. The idea that adding these new units here, 215 new residents, will necessarily make the area more dangerous and overwhelm the area. I don't think it's an axiom. I really think that we should look at this. And final question here for staff, and I don't know who can answer this, but it was said during public comment that this area is dangerous and overwhelmed already. Is there data to back that up? Are there are there traffic accidents that are happening here that we know about at a higher rate than in other areas? Are there pedestrian accidents that are happening here at higher rates than other areas? Or even, are there any pedestrian accidents that we know of in this area?
The chair would like to regard that as a rhetorical question.
No, that was an actual question.
Because we do have more agenda this evening and quite a full council agenda as well. So if staff could, could address Councilmember Reed's question.
And it
if
can
they're
be,
not able to,
it can,
then so be it.
It can be potentially rhetorical for now, but I would encourage us to vote this forward to council and give some time for staff to get back to us on this question and others, and let's move this forward to the full body to consider this this evening. I think that is fair. If you want to vote no later at council, you can, but let's get this to council to have a full vote.
So in response to that question, we would need some time to gather updated data on any kind of vehicle accidents, pedestrian accidents, accidents with bicyclists, et cetera. So if there's something that we can gather for council, then we can get that information and have that for you.
Thank you. And I think that particularly that was one of Councilmember Ravel's main concerns. I would just encourage, if we can vote this forward to council, we can allow staff to get time, and then you can use that in your consideration at council. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Kelly is the last to be recognized before I will weigh in, and then I'll call for a vote.
Okay, I'll try and make it quick. I think we have to be really clear. Staff, when it was requested, this development, staff ruled in the zoning analysis that this was non-compliant. And when it's non-compliant, that means it then goes to a body of experts, the Land Use Commission, to assess it and to decide if it meets standards. And in our City Code 611-1-10, it very clearly states that council shall not approve and adopt a PD in the downtown district if the standards, all of them, are not met. And I think there's no debate here. And the majority of our land use commission, that's why we have bodies, because we want them to weigh in. And we have a majority, including the chair, who very clearly stated that this does not. It very clearly undermines the transition intent of a D4 district. That's not really debatable. And the cumulative effect of congestion already, again, nobody's saying no to an 8 to 10-story building. That will have a huge impact, but this would have tremendous impact that is just beyond what we should be allowing as a council. And so I just want to make that clear. Also, the 140 feet, that's not by right. By right is, and I'll ask maybe Mr. Fletcher, I know you've studied this a lot, but by right is, you have the right to ask for it. But if it were by right, you wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't be here today before land use commissioner, before us.
We've covered that territory.
Okay, all right. Okay, good enough. So I think that's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will weigh in as the council member representing the ward across the street. We need more affordable housing in Evanston. We need more housing. We need more people downtown. I do not deny those three statements. And the developer makes a strong argument for this proposal. I'm not opposed to density. We need more people downtown to help us revitalize, post-COVID and the office workers that aren't coming back. Long-term, we're going to see more residential development downtown. This is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so just to manage expectations going forward over the next several years, 5 to 10 years, we are going to see more development downtown, more residential development. I don't think the traffic and congestion impacts will be as bad as some people are afraid of. We have a code that is based on 1950s era's level of automobiles, but we're seeing a lot more people using public transportation, a lot more people using bicycles, and downtown density is really in compliance with our CARP goals. But as with anything we do, we have to approach this thoughtfully. And when it comes to building height, my perspective is we are in a very much of a gray area here. I will concede that the applicant is allowed to request exactly what they're asking for. They're actually allowed to request even a higher building than what they're asking for. But council is not mandated, we're not obligated to approve this request. It comes to council, it is our judgment call. And so that's what we're doing here is having a discussion, and we're going to render our judgment. And in my judgment, the building as proposed is too high. Our current zoning code designates the east side of this block as a transition zone. We've talked about that. This is not the same as even across the street or closer to the core of downtown. If this project were across the street, I may very well be in support of it. But it is in a transition zone, and we don't have a clear definition of what that means, so it comes to us to make the judgment call. And I'm really mindful of the importance of thoughtful urban planning in maintaining our downtown as a welcoming and aesthetically pleasing environment. I went to school at the University of Illinois, graduated a long time ago, happened to be down on campus last December for the first time in about 30 years. And walking down Green Street, which is the main drag in campus town, I was surprised at the haphazard nature of development on that street. Kind of randomly placed high-rises in what used to be parking lots, kind of squeezed in between older and shorter buildings. No kind of aesthetic continuity. It did not look nice. It was not pleasing to me. And I don't want that to happen here in Evanston. We can expect better. We can do better in Evanston. So while I acknowledge the validity of the request, my answer in this case is going to be no. So if there's no further discussion, I will call for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hardicaris.
No.
Councilmember Ravel.
No.
Councilmember Burns.
No.
Councilmember Kelly.
No.
Councilmember Nusma.
No. So by a vote of 1 in favor and 5 opposing, item P3 is not passed and will not continue to City Council.
A point of information, Councilmember Nusma, this actually will move to City Council with a negative recommendation. By city code, the City Council is the final determining body.
Thank you for that clarification. So I will restate, this will move forward to City Council with a negative recommendation from Planning and Development. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, that moves us to items for discussion and perhaps a very much related topic, item D1. If somebody would like to make a motion on D1.
I would move that we table this to our next meeting.
Yeah, this is a discussion regarding Community Design Commission.
Second.
Do we need?
There's a vote on that.
We need a vote to table.
Yeah.
I will call for, unless there's discussion, I will call for a vote to table item D1.
I'll just very quickly, we're working on getting better on timing. This will help us achieve that, so let's do that.
Okay, roll call vote on item D1. I'm tabling item D1 until our next meeting.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hardicaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye. There being no further business to come before this committee, I will call the meeting adjourned at 7:25 p.m. and